Hello, I am Tamara Warren, and I am the founder of LaCar. On behalf of Whitewall, I would like to welcome you to the 5th annual Lexus Art Series and Innovation Talks by Whitewall with Design Miami. And to our panel today, how to find the creative spark in quarantine, looking at how designers are finding the time to innovate, design, and even dream during these unprecedented times. We are thrilled to be joined by the panelists that are here today. Switzerland-based designer Ini Archibong, who has recently designed for Hermès and Knoll. Katharina Mischer of Vienna-based design studio mischer'traxler, whose collaborations have included Design Miami, Notice, and so many more. And Angel Chang, the designer behind the sustainable women's wear design collection handcrafted by Chinese ethnic minority artisans, merging ancient technology with modern design. So welcome to you all, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And these certainly are unprecedented times, as we all know. And I think it's really interesting to have a recording of how we actually all feel in this time to look back on, because it is truly unusual. And I would like to just have each of you speak to the ways that you've been coping and surviving, creating, thinking, and all of those topics to dive into. So Ini, why don't we start with you? It's a bit later in the day in Switzerland. I'm sure Miami and palm tree sounds wonderful, but you know, it's the cold winter months. How are you getting by?
I'm doing pretty well here. We're just getting into winter, so it hasn't gotten too bad yet. I guess as far as the being in a COVID work situation, it hasn't been that bad actually. I've found myself with a lot of space for reflecting and creating in a way that wasn't as possible when I was traveling a lot. But of course, you know, there's the proliferation of Zoom meetings and all of the things that have replaced the travel, which I don't know, it's something that I've become a bit more wary of as we've continued on this path, simply because you have to find a new way to protect your creative space, I guess.
Do you find that you're able to maintain concentration in the same way that, or is it actually help to actually make work and create during this time? What's that like?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's better for concentration for me. I mean, I work in a pretty specific way. I'm a solitary worker. I don't really invite distraction that much in my regular practice. So, you know, the ability to lock in and not really have much option for leaving the house, you know, makes it so that when you wake up early in the morning, you really can stay focused on a singular design task and not be, you know, taken out of the zone, so to speak. So for me, this the lockdown, especially at the beginning, was a very creative period for me. There was, you know, enough time to create, reflect, and recreate. By the time the days were blending into each other, it was just like a long creative party with intermittent naps, I guess.
That sounds actually really nice.
Yeah.
Katarina, how about you? What's your work-life balance like during this time?
Well, I guess we here are a bit in a different situation, as Thomas and I are never in solitude. I mean, we always work together, and of course now with all the situations, we have to juggle the studio life, family life, all slightly different. So I wouldn't say it was so relaxing for us, especially the first lockdown phase. I have to say it was nearly stressful to handle like the studio space with home office and having our toddler running around at the same time, managing the projects that were still going on and realizing those that were canceled. So it was, I would say the whole year was a bit of like a roller coaster with a lot of ups and downs. It feels like now it's stabilizing in a nice way. But I agree as well, we had a moment of reflection, especially when a lot of things were canceled, and we had to figure out how we would actually navigate through this phase. And I think we learned a lot how to prioritize and how to actually develop plan Bs, and seeing how we actually have the responsibility for all our decisions anyhow. So there were ups and downs, and I think a lot of things to take along into the next years, like from a learning point of view.
Angel, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm in New York City, and as you know, a lot of my work is done in rural China. So I actually freaked out in January. I was really anxious because it was spreading around China, just in the province next to where I work. Fortunately, it didn't get to my villagers, but all the roads were blocked off and closed, and the village doors were closed, so I couldn't go there, and the villagers couldn't leave either. And then that was in January, and then in March, we closed down here in New York, and so because I had already had my freak out, and I knew all about the virus, I was pretty calm. And I was actually really creative, and really creative, like really inspired just by being able to have a shared community experience with people here in New York, as well as those who were in China and Asia. It felt like our worlds were merging together because we could respond and relate to the same exact issue and problem at the same time. And then, like the days started to blend together, and I'd say now that it's getting cold again in New York, it feels like it's the third time around, and so it's getting a bit uninspiring. So what I've done recently is I'm staying at my sister's place in Los Angeles on the beach. And I've been doing that for the past couple of weeks, and it's been a great way to kickstart my creativity again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is a great segue into this next topic, just thinking about this notion of geography. It's obviously, the stillness of the moment and being in one space, but also the lack of change, right? And so much about creativity is informed by experiences we have. And instead, our experiences are very cerebral, they're very two-dimensional with our screens, and whatever immediate space we have, which doesn't, unless, and especially in a place like Los Angeles, or the seasons don't change. We've almost now gone back into kind of a different way of creating work that's futuristic, but also references probably the past more than in recent decades. How do you think about physical space and where you are? And as we go on in time and we're past like that initial spark of reaction, and this is more becoming a way of life to just be in one space, how do you incorporate new ideas and new experiences, or do you reference other points in your life, or is it the news? Like what do you draw from to keep yourself stimulated?
Well, traveling is a really big part of my process. Before the pandemic, I was on a plane every 3 weeks, either flying from New York to China or China back. So that was like a 15-hour flight and a 24-hour journey. And during that time, I would reflect a lot. But I'd say this time, I hadn't flown in 8 months, which is like the longest time in my life. I hadn't been on a plane. And the first time I was flying, I was really anxious, obviously, to be around people, but just seeing the world geographically and seeing the land below from a whole new perspective. And I think that distance away from like the monotony of everyday life and what you assume is normal, that distance from that was really helpful, because now as I work in sustainability, I suddenly saw, the whole US, where not one place was not touched by humans or buildings or, roads. And I was thinking about all the light bulbs that were being produced to light those places and all the wires underneath the ground, and just thinking, wow, like we really need to do something about this. When I got to LA, there are things that I never noticed before, like going out into the ocean, going into the water, and you know, like dolphins would come and swim next to me. And just having that sensitivity to nature around you was a really amazing, magnificent experience. So, you know, inspiration comes from all over the place. Before, maybe I was more visual, where I'd have to go to a museum or look at images and hear music. But now it's more sensorial, where I can, you know, notice things that I never noticed before.
Yeah, Ini, you mentioned being appreciating not being on a plane and being still. So how do you feel like you have a, you know, a different kind of connection to your work because of that, or are there things you're missing, or is this allowing you to just pour into stuff that's just been waiting in the wings?
A bit of all of the above, actually. I think like touching off of what Angel was saying, a lot of my work always was predicated on, you know, the ideas that like the things around us could inspire, you know, deeper energies and emotions to arise within us. And so I've always had that as part of my practice to kind of spend time in nature and pick up on like the small cues around me. And then as I stopped being, you know, a student and young designer and started, you know, building a practice, I started flying a lot and started losing that connection a bit, and, you know, the time to go out and take a walk or to go by the lake. And so now I kind of regained that back. And, you know, the ability to start doing that again made me realize how much I've been missing it, and how I'd spent kind of a lot of time relying on my design skills to keep, you know, things going, as opposed to really tapping into what got me in a position to have clients. So I think for me it was a much needed reset button, and, you know, it did allow me to kind of dig back into my mental archives and bring some of the concepts that I've been thinking out before out. But you know, I think like a lot of us designers, the way that industries were affected by everything, you know, made it so that, you know, even though there was this rush of creativity, there wasn't necessarily a whole lot of places to place those things necessarily. But I think, like, on the whole, I'm rather appreciative of the slowdown, but I definitely miss the social aspect of being able to travel, because you know, I'm here by myself, and I'm the type that can get very consumed with my work. So, you know, being forced to travel also forced me to get out of my apartment.
Right. Yeah. Katharina, you know, you obviously work collaboratively with Thomas, so there's more a feedback loop, right, in the house, or in the studio as well. But you know, obviously we were talking in advance that, you know, there were other people in your life, there were other, you know, moments and things that you would engage with that would inform your work as well. So how's that going for you?
I actually, well, we never missed, like Thomas and I always go for walks when we get stuck in a project. So this is not something that came now new to us during the phase of the pandemic. It's more that we appreciate maybe the closer walks more, or we realize that there's, because we were always amazed while traveling and going on walks there, how amazing nature there is. But in fact, it's everywhere amazing. It doesn't matter if you look in your suburban area, or if you just look in a park, or if you are really close to a beach. In the end, if you look at the details, it's always amazing and beautiful. So that we realized once more. But I think something we really appreciated was this moment of understanding that it's a big planet, but at the same time it's very interconnected, and we actually really understand and relate to the same issues and the same problems and the same fears and maybe environmental as well, like that we realize it's all interconnected, and that's beautiful. And at the same time you realize how your locality gets an importance, and actually we hope to take more from that view into future projects, into future understanding, because it's like this interconnectivity, but at the same time that there is a local aspect to everything. And I feel like that was always very inspiring, but now this phase really made it apparent so that you can really discuss it and everyone understands what's meant by a global issue, but looking at local happenings and how this all relates to each other. And I think that probably helps us all to move into a better direction in the future.
Sure. Something that I am fascinated by during this time is our perception of time, right? It's slow in some ways, but it's also moving forward. And there could be, for some of us, a shift in our perception of time, of how we use our time and how we think about what our lives mean going forward, which then as designers and artists lives on in your work. And as you move forward and we think about whatever an end is or a continuation, how do you think about your time and your intention now? But when you look farther ahead, what do you see happening directionally in your work?
I do at times project what might happen, or what I would hope would happen, but I don't know. I think we're in a situation where we don't know where things are going to go. So I try to maintain the idea that if I'm smart about how I approach things now, then I can be nimble when the next thing comes. And also having the space to think about what works and what doesn't work. In that sense, thinking about the future, I would hope that the things that I learned during this pandemic, like really demanding my creative space regardless of the needs of the studio or anything else, I think those carry on hopefully to the next phase. And then as far as time passing, it is a little bit strange, as a designer, where we have these benchmarks like Milan and other events that help you to kind of remember the order of things that have happened. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to think about in the future, how that's going to change. I mean, if we're ever going to get back to, always being able to remember the rainy day in April, and be able to pinpoint the year based on the memory of who you were around or, what was going on. We don't have that for 2022.
Yeah, so time is really interesting because I feel like during this time, there's a lot of downtime, there's a lot of time for reflection, a lot of time for meditation. And I found that I was able to sort of expand and contract time. It was kind of like a playing with your mind to see, time went by really slowly each day, but then 1 week seemed to disappear just like that. And chronologically, the same amount of hours and minutes and seconds are going by, but it was just our perspective of what was going on and what we focused on that either slowed it or sped it up. So from that was like a neat, unproductive sort of ideas that came about during that time. But I also realized, the ancient Greeks had this concept of chronos. There was chronos, which was linear time, your calendars, your schedules, but then there's also this other kind of time, which is kairos. And those are the opportune moments and just the right timing. And for me, it's like those surprising moments where everything just works out. You show up at the right place, you meet the right person, and there's no explanation for it. So I felt more sensitivity to that. And then also just not being a slave to time anymore, because we can't schedule things. So I felt more comfortable just kind of riding along, kind of like surfing on a wave, to give another ocean reference, but it's just being in the flow and just taking it as it comes and not resisting it or trying not to resist it, because there's nothing we can do at this time.
Well, I think most of us, like creative people, are very good in improvising and taking opportunities, but I have to say I do like planning ahead sometimes, and it feels like this year every day something changes immediately, like something is cancelled or something else pops up. And actually I have to say I hope that in the future there will be a form of stability, like not necessarily a boring stability, but a bit of a, that you can plan ahead and know a bit what's coming the next day, or at least in a few weeks. I feel it a bit tiring, to be honest, not being able to plan a bit ahead. And especially at one moment for us, it was really difficult as well, balancing out how to handle it with studio and stuff. Like we have a few people freelancing and telling them, we'll see if the project happens or not. I have to say, if you cannot plan a bit, it really makes it a bit of a struggle sometimes, even though I like improvisation and I'm happy to jump in, but I hope there will be a certain stability coming along after things cool down a bit or go back to a new kind of normal.
Oh, I can add to that. Yeah, you know, when I first started going into China, it's very similar to now. Right now, we had all of these events planned, collections and launches for the year, and we had to throw all of that away. But when I first started in China, like 9 years ago, I also had these plans to organize things. And what I realized living in nature was that you just can't plan things with nature. Nothing really works. Or if you try to plan or you try to rush things, then everything just kind of falls apart. And so this was a really great reminder to just let go of that, because it's at the moments when you try to plan and you're not in line with nature's timing that stress and anxiety and friction really starts to happen within yourself and with people.
Yeah, and if you think about it too, there's also this idea of making something, right, and getting deep and having a conversation with yourself. But just thinking about it, it's the idea of how is it going to be received and who is it for, and without being able to be in dialogue directly or to observe people or to know what's 2 weeks ahead, how is it going to land, right, when it has an audience in a moment? Do you think about that? Have you held back on certain ideas to wait for another time, or do you just organically flow? Like, how do you pace yourself on, bringing the ideas to fruition, putting them out in the world once they're made and ready for viewing?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I felt like for the past few years, I've had to hold back and not present my collection or my vision because I felt it was too early for people. It was based off of, creating a collection made entirely by hand without any electricity or chemicals or fossil fuels, like making clothes how they were made 300 years ago. But the reason for doing that is because we need to find a more sustainable way of making clothing today. That in the context of fashion being, one of the most polluting industries in the world. And so before I really held back, but after this pandemic, I feel people are a lot more open to sustainability and to the environment, and they know how forceful nature can be, and they now realize climate change is real. And so I feel like I no longer have to hold myself back. Like I can be free and open with my vision.
It's kind of amazing. Yeah, I think this is the year of the least, I'm not sure of the exact number, but the amount of greenhouse gases has decreased exponentially across the globe. And I wonder how that will impact other industries as well too. Ini, do you have any thoughts on what, how to release, how to think about the timing of your work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm the type of designer that I don't know. There's always a bit of immediacy to everything, almost franticness. Like when an idea hits me, I kind of need to get it out, and in adapting to what's going on, it hasn't even necessarily slowed that. I think the thing that has shifted is where to focus the creativity. I'd already started projects that coming into this year that were kind of put on hold, that were more kind of long-term sort of things, like with brands and companies. But at the onset of this, my time and my energy shifted into areas where, you know, I could still maintain a bit of that immediacy. So focusing more on like the gallery work, and really doing my best to continue working with craftsmen. So once, you know, small travel started, just going kind of to the boundaries of where I was allowed to travel to and still making stuff, which I think was also quite good, you know, with I'm sure the craftsmen losing some of the work that they normally would have had. Being able to say, hopefully next year we'll be able to present this stuff means that we need to be making it right now. So I haven't really seen much of a slowdown in terms of the ability to keep making stuff, and keep taking the concepts from idea into something physical, you know, prototypes, whether or not we know where they're going to go. You know, at least we get to do the part that I enjoy the most, which is coming up with it, making it.
Katharina, yeah.
I would say for us it's similar, because we didn't stop producing or prototyping or doing new ideas or testing things, because we agree if you have an idea that you want to try out, you have to try out, and you cannot wait for the exact moment. And funny enough, Angel said that maybe there's a good time for certain projects right now. And what we see as well in our practice is that we have a few very rather, like some of them are even 12 years old projects that reflect on biodiversity, and it feels like now is more the time that people start to understand them and really put them, they view it with different eyes. And I feel like there's more interest in those projects, which is interesting to see, because yeah, it's they are out there anyway already since a long time, but it feels like now there's a better understanding and approachability to them. And so, yeah, I think if you have projects, you do them because at one point in time, people will relate to it. And maybe it's not always in that moment when it's really fresh and new. Maybe it takes a time till other people see it the same way. And that's why we never hold back ideas if we think it has to be done. And even if it's just for us, then we do it. And yeah, so far it was always a good decision.
Yeah. And how do you go about, you know, we have this idea of, you know, how we communicate. How have your circles changed, or the people that you draw inspiration from, you know, not being able to have those intimate conversations in person? Have you drawn closer to certain people in your lives, or have you become a little more silent in how you engage with others? What about the role, I guess essentially what I'm asking is the role of your communities, and how has community and your concept of it shifted in this moment?
In our case, I could say we do, I mean, normally, like in Vienna, for example, there's a Vienna Design Week where you normally meet all the local fellow designers, and you exchange on a next, like having a little drink, and you exchange automatically interesting aspects of your professional career. I feel like that's missing, because of course a lot of things moved into digital, and even though there was a Vienna Design Week, which was really nice, there were no parties, no openings, no happenings where you occasionally get together and you talk about things. So I feel like that's missing these days, like this direct exchange that wasn't planned, like, you know, this unplanned incidents. But we do regularly talk digitally with friends or fellow colleagues to see what's going on. But of course, it's always more planned and more structured and less happening along the way. And that's a pity, I would say. That's something I really miss. And at one point, yeah, I hope it's going to be back to real meetings and not just digital feedback, because it feels different. Like a real meeting, you have a physicality, you have some atmospheric around you, you have a feeling how the other one is actually responding, and I don't know, it drives the conversation in a different way than sitting in front of a computer, I have to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be also great to hear from all of you, you know, in the near term, what can we see that you've worked on during this time, to talk about the projects that might be coming out soon or in late 2020 or early 21. If you each could touch on that, I would love to hear, and make sure that people are aware of what you've been doing?
Yeah. So I've actually made a bit of a pivot with some of the things that I've been focused on, as I said before. So I started with a new client in the tech space, working with Logitech. And so hopefully you'll be seeing some of my influence from a creative standpoint on some of their products and campaigns and different things that I consult on. And then from the standpoint of the things that I've been doing for years, I've got my first gallery show hopefully opening next year with Friedman Benda, and that's been a huge undertaking. Figuring out how to keep production going, and me throwing in the curveballs of all of the ideas I had at the beginning of the lockdown, replacing some of the old ideas. So we continue prototyping with that. So hopefully that's coming next year. And we're still working away at this, the Knoll collaboration. So hopefully we'll see something from that soon.
Mm-hmm. Angel, how about you?
Yeah, so normally I would be designing a new collection with the artisans in China, and now since Americans are not allowed in China, and probably won't be until the spring, it's a bit more challenging. So for me, I've been able to focus more on the message that I want to convey, and that is that that it's possible to create clothing with least negative impact on the planet. With each of our pieces has a nearly zero carbon footprint because we just use the sunlight for light. We use the mountain spring to rinse our fabrics, and we grow our cotton naturally, organically, so we're not pumping water into the fields. And so I kept that undercover for the last 9 years because I wasn't sure how to tell the story, like I mentioned before. And now I feel like I can express it in the form of health, because it is healthier to have things without any chemicals on it. And it's healthy to be touched by nature, something that hasn't been manipulated or processed by a machine. So I want to keep telling my story, and I'll tell it in different ways. And then one thing that I have been working on this past year is natural indigo and the climate will dye colors differently on fabric based on the temperature and just based on nature's climate. And so for this 2019, every month I've been dyeing fabric for the same amount of time, and it shows a range of colors. And so for next year, I'll be designing that into a collection to show how nature and climate can, how you can see it in the fabric.
Sounds amazing. You can't wait to see it. Katharina, what's next?
What's next? What we did during this year was actually focusing again on our real limited collection, but it's already finished. We actually came up with a new vase that showcase endangered fern species in Austria. So that's rather new, and we hope we're going to show it more the next years when there are more opportunities. Currently, we work with the museum in Vienna, like with the MAC, with the Museum for Applied Arts. We work on a small exhibition where they show pieces from the archive. I think it will be a really fun little exhibition because it's highlighting pieces that are hardly on show because they never fit in concepts, or they hardly are shown because they don't go along so easily in a lot of other exhibitions. And that's a very quick project that was meant to be, it's basically from 8 weeks from start till the show will hopefully open after our lockdown here ends. That's very soon, and we started again a dialogue with Perigette on biodiversity, and that's something we will continue next year. And yes, we are busy, I would say.
Well, hearing about all of your work actually makes me look forward to the future and the short term. And, I think we all need artists and designers right now.
I forgot one really important project.
Oh,
I'm doing our first project at an architectural scale next year. And it's the Pavilion for the African Diaspora to be shown at the London Design Biennale. And this is the biggest project that I've undertaken thus far in my life. So it's a surprise that it slipped my mind a second ago. But yeah, there are a lot of really great people involved. And, it allowed me to bring together a nice team full of misfits and recent graduates to work on hopefully a very successful and impressive project.
I think we all need artists and designers right now to give us that creative inspiration and spark, to know that you're out in the world making work and reflecting and really making the world a better place, right? So this conversation has inspired me, and I want to thank you all for just taking the time away to talk and share a little bit about what's going on behind closed doors, and wishing you well. And thank you so much for joining us.